Canadian foreign aid gets stolen by an Islamist terrorist group in Syria. Edmonton Police protect the identity of a man who took a child hostage in a CBSA center in Edmonton, but then they don't have a problem naming that child. And finally, the mainstream media shows its open contempt and bigotry towards Canadians of religious convictions. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the program. Welcome to the podcast. As I mentioned earlier this week, we're going to be coming to you twice a week now. So we're going to have a midweek podcast as well as the Friday podcast. And we're going to expand to talk about issues beyond just media bias and media spin. We're still going to talk about that, but we're also going to talk about some of the issues of the day, some of the things that I'm interested in, which are, stories related to immigration, national security, and terrorism. And then we're also going to talk about some of the broader issues facing Canadians and talking about what it's like to be a conservative in Canada. So let's get right to it. This story kind of blows my mind. Over at Global News, Stuart Bell, who's a terrific investigative reporter over there, has this exclusive. Canadian aid to Syria was stolen by Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group, documents show. So looks like they filed some access to information reports, and finally the government declassified this report, showing that in August 2018, a organization that is a recipient of foreign aid, so Canadian government, Canadian taxpayers sends foreign aid to an organization that was posted in Syria. And basically their warehouse was ransacked by gunned militants from this terrorist organization that is connected to Al-Qaeda. So this group wants to once again impose and enforce a Islamic State in Syria. And, they carry out all kinds of terrorist attacks. They're a listed terrorist they're a listed terrorist entity according to the Department of Public Safety in Canada. And so these individuals basically just stole a bunch of electronics. They stole computers, laptops, iPads, two-way radios, projectors, all kinds of stuff that obviously enable them to carry out terrorist attacks, to do logistics, to organize, to spread propaganda. And so here we have a pretty blatant example of Canadian foreign aid going from Canada to an organization and then ending up in the hands of our enemies, in the hands of Islamist terrorism. And I can't help but connect this back to the election campaign and Conservative leader Andrew Scheer, who proposed that Canada cut its foreign aid spending by 25%. Canada currently spends about $6 billion a year sending money to foreign governments and to other recipients. Foreign aid is a whole big industry. There's tons and tons of schemes. Most developed countries put lots and lots of money towards basically just redistributing wealth from the developed world to the developing world, hoping that that will lead to rising living standards in the poorest countries. Sadly, a lot of times the money doesn't go where it's supposed to. So Andrew Scheer's position was that a lot of money goes to sort of middle income countries, goes to some of our rivals. We're paying countries like China, who basically have developed economies by now. And then sometimes the money ends up going to adversarial governments, places like Iran and Russia. And so Scheer's position was that foreign aid isn't very well spent. And at a time where, Canada's running massive deficits, we have mounting debt, our own industries at home are struggling, hundreds of thousands of people in the oil and gas industry are out of work. We have our own problems on First Nations reserves with homeless people. Why aren't we spending that money at home? Why are we sending it abroad? It's all very legitimate, and yet the mainstream media treated it like it was just this horrible idea. You saw piece after piece from mainstream media outlets condemning this idea, talking to people who work within the foreign aid industry, condemning it. The partisan liberals over at CBC fact-checked Andrew Scheer's claim and deemed that it was false. Of course they did. It's just interesting. As an aside, I have a background in this topic. When I was in graduate school, I wrote my master's dissertation on foreign aid, on the flaws within the foreign aid model, and I looked at free market solutions and ideas that could actually help lift people out of poverty and help develop places in the least developed parts of the world. And there's actually a pretty significant body of literature from people who take that same position, that foreign aid is not helpful, that it's often futile, it's often counterproductive, and often it creates more harm than good. It creates dependency and all kinds of unintended consequences. So if the mainstream media actually wanted to be fair, they could have gone to people who have this position. Dambisa Moyo, who is a Zambian-born economist, has a book called Dead Aid, and it's all about how harmful foreign aid initiatives have been to her, home country and to places all over Africa, and how, 30, 40 years after foreign aid was first introduced, some of those countries are worse off now than they were before. Another person is Bill Easterly over at New York University. He's written several books about some of the sort of most unintended consequences and foreign aid really just backfiring. And so, again, if the mainstream media wanted to be fair, they could talk about the flaws in foreign aid as well as maybe providing a critique from someone who works within one of these UN agencies or a professor who's connected to one of these organizations. But instead, because they're the mainstream media and they hate conservatives, you just saw overwhelming criticism of Scheer's proposal. I think this story about Canadian foreign aid ending up in the hands of terrorists is just another data point to show that, Andrew Scheer wasn't entirely wrong and that there's definitely room for improvement, let's just say, when it comes to Canada's foreign aid. Okay, let's move on to another story. This one is just absolutely mind-boggling to me. This happened last Friday at a CBSA center in Edmonton, a Canadian Border Services Agency center. There was an individual who was getting into an altercation with officials, and things escalated to the point where it became a hostage situation. The man who was sort of, shouting and saying, talking about how he wants to speak to a UN lawyer. All of a sudden he grabs a child who happens to be in the waiting room. The child is not related to him in any way. He's just a child who happens to be in the same waiting room with his parents. He grabs a 3-year-old, holds a knife to his throat, making his incoherent demands to the officers. And the reason that we know all of this is because it was caught on tape, and that tape has surfaced. So here it is.
No, I said you want to see the blood. And it's gonna be actually because you caused it. I caused it. Okay, let's grab it. Oh my God. You wanna open it or not? No. Because if I can die, the kids like these kids. Listen, they died in my face. Please, escort me to her office. That's it. If you don't want to see her, please. So don't ignore my life when I was in danger. Like
you can see the child is incredibly distraught. Crying, screaming, as a 3-year-old child would be if they were snatched from their parents' arms by a stranger who all of a sudden, holds a knife to him. And so, it was a tense situation. Luckily, things were calmed down and the child is safe now, although probably a little traumatized from what he went through. And yet, when the media reported about it and the Edmonton Police put out their statement about this incident, they protected the name of the perpetrator, the man who carried out this hostage situation, and yet they decided to name the 3-year-old child in the incident. So in the minds of the Edmonton Police, you can name a child who was caught up in a horrifying incident, but you should protect the name of the perpetrator who is still in custody, presumably being charged. So again, this is a problem that you see in Canada over and over and over again. When there is a crime, a public incident, a terrorist attack, an attack of some sort, there's a kind of hush-hush mentality among the police. They keep key details hidden. They keep the identity of the perpetrators hidden. They don't want Canadians to know key information. And, I think it shows just a basically a distrust of the Canadian public. The police think that we are incapable of handling the truth, that we shouldn't be given facts because of the conclusions that we might come to. But really what they do is they just leave a black hole for conspiracy theorists online and people who want to fill in their own gaps. And, I can give you dozens of examples of this happening where the police just don't provide information. I mean, I think the biggest example that comes to mind was after the Danforth shooting in Toronto 2 summers ago. The police just kind of refused to provide any information. They were completely tight-lipped. They didn't provide the name. They didn't provide, details about the individual. Even as things started to come up and people started putting 2 and 2 together, ISIS took responsibility for the attack. There was still a very hush-hush mentality among the Toronto Police Services. Again, why don't they trust the public? If they put the information out there, they should trust Canadians to draw their own conclusions. But when they don't, you start to wonder, what is it that they're doing? Who are they trying to protect? Why are they keeping a lid on this? And another one, just last month in Calgary, there was a military parade. It happened to fall on the anniversary of an ISIS terrorist attack. There was 2 that happened in 2 days in Quebec and in Ottawa on Parliament Hill back in 2014. A military parade was happening. All of a sudden, a car speeds past the barrier, starts darting all over the place, onto the sidewalk. Finally, the driver was shot by Calgary police. And again, the police didn't release any information. We didn't know the name of the driver. We didn't know, whether there was any connection to the anniversary of the ISIS terrorist attack or what the motives were. They just didn't provide any information whatsoever. I think it shows a really sad state in Canada where the police just don't trust the public. And I think increasingly it will lead to a situation where people in the public, in turn, don't trust the police, or at least the higher-ups and the sort of gatekeepers within those kind of institutions. So again, why would you name the 3-year-old child who's a victim in all this, but not name the individual that actually holds the child hostage? So unfortunate. Okay, finally, let's talk about this last issue here that I want to get to, which is all over social media. So on Wednesday, the mainstream media put this question to Andrew Scheer. Again, they really just won't give up on this question. They smell blood when it comes to Scheer, and they really think that him being a Catholic and a social conservative in his personal life is unacceptable. And so they're just going to continue to go at it. They did this throughout the entire campaign, and here they are again. Let's just play this clip of this question that was put to Andrew Scheer, and then we'll play part of Scheer's response.
We made it very clear during the election, in the last few months and years, our party is inclusive. We believe in the equality of rights of all Canadians. My personal opinion is that I respect the rights of every single Canadian, regardless of their sexual orientation.
Okay, I'll just say it's so distasteful to hear a journalist pushing a politician about their personal view and what their definition of sin is. I mean, Scheer's a Catholic, so asking whether or not she thinks that something is a sin is just beyond the realm of public policy and what we should ask of politicians. Canada is a free society. We believe in religious freedom. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms lays out that we believe in religious freedom. So people should be free to believe whatever they want is a sin, right? Presumably Andrew Scheer thinks that adultery is a sin. Presumably he thinks that it is a sin to engage in sexual relationships outside of marriage. Now, does anyone believe that Andrew Scheer would ever legislate on that? No, because you are allowed to have a personal opinion that guides your personal life and an opinion when it comes to legislation. And that is ultimately what a free society is and what religious freedom means. And so this idea that conservatives are like these autocratic fascists that are going to legislate on all the aspects of their religion is just totally unfounded, and it's totally unfair, and it shows a bigotry from the media themselves. Of course, they're not asking these questions of Singh. Of course, they're not asking these questions of Trudeau. And, they'll say, oh, it's because, there's no ambiguity when it comes to the other politicians' positions on these issues. No, it's the mainstream media's fixation that you cannot be pro-life personally because they don't trust that you won't legislate into that, or that they don't trust that Andrew Scheer could be believing, the Catholic doctrine, the acts of homosexuality is a sin, and not legislate on that. So they're supposed to be separate. A man is allowed to have his own religious convictions, and the fact that the mainstream media can't accept that, I think it just shows their own blatant bigotry. It is religious bigotry, no matter which way you put it. Again, imagine the mainstream media asking Jagmeet Singh personal questions about what he believes is a sin. Jagmeet Singh is clearly an observant Sikh. He doesn't cut his hair. So would a journalist ask Jagmeet Singh, do you believe it's a sin to cut your hair? And then would they imagine that maybe Singh is going to legislate on that and create laws demanding that no Canadian can cut their hair? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense if you try to apply the same standard to other politicians. But journalists just don't really think that way. They just see an opportunity. They say, everyone in Canada must hold the same view. They must have the same view when it comes to abortion. They must hold the same view when it comes to same-sex marriage or same-sex relationship. And anything outside that is simply not acceptable. It's so, to me, so despicable, so cringeworthy to see journalists just continuing to push this way, and then seeing many others on the left, especially I see it on social media, defending this and saying that Scheer deserves it and that the journalists are right to ask these kind of very personal, cringeworthy questions. I think it's not a good place to be in a free society where all of a sudden there are all these litmus tests about what you can and cannot believe in your personal life, where you've already said that you have no intention on bringing forth any kind of legislation. And I will say I thought Scheer kind of had some spark here. He kind of pushed back a little bit. It's a good start. If I were Scheer, I would have been much, much, much more aggressive in just pointing out the bigotry of this question and the absurdity of asking someone something like this, reinforcing the idea that conservatives don't want to live in a top-down society where all of our morality is legislated. No, conservatives believe in freedom. They want to have smaller government, more limited government, and more freedom, including religious freedoms in our individual lives and in our homes. So I like that Scheer pushed back a little bit, but I think he has a long way to go and he should be much firmer. If he wants to maintain his position as leader of the Conservative Party, if he wants to have any shot at becoming Prime Minister, you have to recognize that the press are not your friends. They're not your allies, especially questions like this. You're never going to win these people over. And I think that the best shot that you have is showing your backbone and fighting back and calling them out when they show this kind of just, clear bigotry towards religious people, and especially towards Catholics, towards conservatives. All right, guys, I'm going to leave it at that, wrap it up. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and we will be back next week with more podcasts. Don't forget to check out our website, tnc.news. We've got lots of exclusive content up there. And we also have a mailing list. So if you join our mailing list, you get all of the content. We send out a couple emails every week providing all the information that we are working on over at tnc.news. So thank you so much and have a great weekend.